The moment Rayan Mercer stepped into the bright glass-walled cafe, balancing his tired son on one arm and a stack of overdue bills in the other, he had no idea that his entire life was about to be flipped upside down by a woman who owned half the skyline. That morning, sunlight poured through the windows, bouncing off polished marble floors, warming the backs of early commuters, and painting everything in hopeful gold. But Rayan felt none of that warmth. He felt heavy, invisible, and worn thin by years of being strong when no one was watching. He was a single father with too many responsibilities, too many disappointments, and a heart that had learned to expect nothing. When he accidentally bumped into a woman in a pale blue dress, spilling coffee onto her designer shoes, he assumed it was just another humiliating moment in a long list of them. What he didn't know was that this woman, Isadora Vale, was a billionaire who had just decided to use him for a lie that would slowly turn into something real. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and unexpected love stories that heal broken souls, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel Kindness Story. Your support keeps these heartfelt stories alive. Rayan had not planned to go into the cafe. He was only there because the daycare called to say his son Micah had developed a mild fever, and he needed to pick him up early. He had missed half a day of work already that week, and could feel his manager's patience thinning. As he stood awkwardly, apologizing again and again, Isadora barely noticed the spill. She noticed his tired eyes, the way he held his son protectively, and the way he looked like someone who had been carrying the world alone for too long. She had entered the cafe with her own problem. Her parents were arriving that afternoon, determined to introduce her to another potential fiancé from a powerful family. They had always treated her life like a corporate merger. She was exhausted from fighting them, from pretending she didn't want love, from pretending she didn't feel lonely in her massive penthouse filled with echoing silence. And then she saw Rayan, a man who looked honest, kind, and utterly unprepared for manipulation. That was when a reckless idea took root in her mind. Without using direct words, she made him an offer that sounded like kindness, a free lunch for him and his son as an apology. He hesitated, pride fighting hunger, but Micah's soft cough and his own empty stomach won. They sat under warm daylight streaming through the windows, and Rayan found himself telling her small truths about his life, about losing his wife to an illness years ago, about learning how to braid hair, pack lunches, and survive on hope alone. Isadora listened more than anyone ever had. She didn't interrupt. She didn't look bored, and for the first time in years Rayan felt seen. Then, when lunch ended, she asked him for something shocking. She needed him to pretend to be her boyfriend for a family dinner that afternoon. Just one evening, no long-term involvement, no emotional strings, just a performance. Rayan wanted to say no. His instincts screamed that rich people's problems were never simple. But he thought about the groceries he couldn't afford, the daycare bill overdue by 2 weeks, and Micah's medicine. Isadora noticed his hesitation and offered more than he had made in a month. It felt humiliating. It felt wrong, but it also felt like survival. He agreed, convincing himself it was just acting, nothing more. He had no idea he was walking into a world that would tear open his scars and slowly teach him how to heal. That afternoon, the sun shone brightly on Isadora's family estate, a massive modern home surrounded by perfectly trimmed gardens that looked like paintings. Rayan had never been anywhere like it. Every step made him feel smaller, like he didn't belong. Micah clung to his hand, eyes wide with curiosity. Isadora had transformed into a different version of herself, softer, warmer, less armored. She introduced Rayan and Micah as her boyfriend and his son. Her parents studied him the way investors studied risky ventures. They were polite, but their disappointment was almost visible. Rayan felt it in every forced smile, every calculated glance. He told himself to just get through the evening. But something strange happened. He didn't pretend to be impressive. He spoke honestly, He talked about raising a child alone, about making mistakes, about finding joy in small things like sunny mornings and warm bread. He spoke about Micah with a quiet pride that filled the room. Isadora's parents were not used to hearing someone talk like that. They were used to ambition, not affection. Rayan didn't try to sell himself. He simply existed, and that authenticity began to crack their polished expectations. For Isadora, watching him was unsettling. She had built her entire life around control, boardrooms, contracts, negotiations. Everything obeyed her will. But Rayan didn't. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress. And somehow, that made her feel more exposed than she had ever been. She had expected to feel relieved that she had pulled off the lie. Instead, she felt guilt pressing against her chest. She had dragged a kind man into her mess. When she saw how her parents subtly dismissed him, how they spoke over him, how they treated him like a temporary inconvenience, something inside her snapped. She realized she didn't want him to be temporary. After dinner, when the day faded into soft evening light, Rayan expected to leave and never see her again. But Isadora asked him to stay a little longer, this time not as part of the lie, but as himself. They walked through the garden, Micah chasing butterflies, laughter floating through the warm air. Rayan found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in years, not forced, not polite, real, and Isadora, who had everything, felt like she was experiencing something priceless. In the days that followed, she kept finding reasons to call him, not for pretending, just for coffee, for lunch, for small walks in sunlit parks where Micah played while they talked. Rayan tried to maintain distance. He reminded himself that he was not part of her world, that people like her didn't fall for people like him. But Isadora didn't treat him like a charity case. She asked about his dreams, not his struggles. She admired his resilience, not his poverty. Slowly, dangerously, Rayan began to hope again, but hope is fragile when you've been broken. One afternoon, Rayan overheard Isadora's assistant talking about him on the phone, calling him an experiment, a distraction, something temporary. The words hit harder than any insult ever had. He felt foolish, used, small. That night, he didn't answer Isadora's calls. He packed Micah's bag, determined to go back to the quiet, lonely life he understood. It hurt, but it felt safer. Isadora realized what had happened too late. She showed up at his small apartment the next morning, sunlight spilling into the narrow hallway, determination burning in her eyes. She had never chased anyone before. She had always been chased. But this time, she needed him to understand that he was not a lie anymore. She told him about her loneliness, about how wealth had built walls instead of bridges, about how he had made her feel human again. Rayan wanted to believe her, but fear is louder than hope when you've lost everything once. He didn't trust easily. He didn't want Micah to get attached to someone who might disappear. That was his greatest fear, not for himself, but for his son. So he pulled away. Weeks passed, the days stayed bright, but Rayan felt darker. Micah kept asking about Isadora, about the parks, about the big house, about the woman who laughed like sunshine. Rayan realized something painful. He wasn't just protecting himself anymore. He was denying his son a chance to be happy. Meanwhile, Isadora faced her parents again. This time, she didn't lie. She told them the truth, that Rayan was real. That he mattered, that love wasn't a contract. They were furious. They threatened to cut her off, to embarrass her publicly, to ruin his life with their influence. For the first time, Isadora didn't flinch. She chose him, even if he didn't choose her back. She went to Rayan's building one last time, not with grand gestures, but with honesty. She didn't ask him to trust her. She told him he didn't have to. She only wanted him to know that he had changed her, and that she would never see people the same way again. That was when Rayan finally broke. He cried in front of her. Not dramatic, not loud, but quiet, shaking sobs of a man who had been strong for too long. He told her how afraid he was, how he didn't want to lose again, how he didn't feel worthy of her world, and Isadora, who had never felt small in her life, sat on the steps of his building under the warm daylight and held his hand, telling him that worth wasn't something money could buy. From that day forward, they stopped pretending. Their love was slow, cautious, and deeply real. Isadora learned how to live small. Rayan learned how to dream big. Micah learned what it looked like when two broken people chose each other every day. If this story is touching your heart right now, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Kindness Story. Your engagement helps stories like this reach people who need them most. Months later, on a bright spring afternoon, Isadora stood in a park watching Rayan teach Micah how to ride a bike. No cameras, no luxury cars, just laughter, scraped knees, and sunlight. Her parents stood at a distance, quietly observing. They had resisted at first, but something about Rayan's quiet strength, his patience, and the way Micah adored him began to soften them. They saw something money could not buy. Rayan eventually got a better job through his own skills, not her connections. He wanted to stand on his own. Isadora respected that. Their relationship was not a fairy tale. They argued, they struggled, they learned, but they chose each other, not out of need, but out of love. And one day, sitting on a park bench under golden daylight, Rayan realized he was no longer afraid of happiness. He had been tricked into a dinner, yes, but he had found a family. Before the ending, I have a special request for you. Please comment the word hope. If this story made you believe in second chances, because sometimes life doesn't change with grand miracles. Sometimes it changes when a tired single dad walks into a cafe on a sunny morning and spills coffee on the wrong woman, and somehow it turns out to be the right one. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps kindness alive.